So, Dion Fortune's book of psychic self-defense, not exactly the correct title. I don't have a physical copy, right? I think I used to have a physical copy. In fact, I've probably had a couple of physical copies. But it's one of those books that I end up like giving out to people and then they never ever give back, right? Which I don't mind, because if I had to give that book to someone, it's probably because they are some sort of dabbler, and I would rather them have it and not give it back, and maybe potentially learn something from it by keeping it on the shelf in case anything bad happens, than them give it back and realistically not use any of the knowledge or anything like that. I got the Kindle edition, okay, which I got on my iPad. So I keep that. I have gotten into the habit now of buying some Kindle editions of things instead of going and rebuying the physical books if possible, because that way I can't lose them or lend them out and not get them back. So I'm kind of at the stage of sort of having half of my stuff is actually magical practitioner kind of stuff. If I think, oh, I've given it out, or I think this is actually worth it, I tend to buy more than likely the Kindle version, not so much the physical book now. But anyway, that's not really important. You don't really want to know about that. So, is this a good book? Well, this isn't really a book review. Instead, what I wanted to talk about is psychic self-defense, defensive magic in general. It is probably one of my favorite forms of magic, or areas of magic, we should say. Because there's always something further. There's always something further that you can go down this kind of rabbit hole. So there's rabbit holes that all link together, okay? Like a warren or something. Healing, defensive magic, and offensive magic, attacking, are all linked together, okay? You go far down one, and you will reach a kind of stopping point. You have to progress in all of those three areas once you get past a certain point in order to get any further. So if you're trying to attack and destroy things and do offensive, maleficent, baneful magic, you're not going to learn and be able to get that far with that until you start being able to understand on a deeper level the things that you're messing around with. I'll give you an example, albeit it will be a crap example, right? If I wanted to go and cause some problems, go and cause some trouble, what I could do is I could go and take my baseball bat and go and smash up someone's computer. Okay, they'd be very upset with that, right? Maybe it's a school or a college or a university or a company in office. I just take my baseball bat and start smashing things apart. That's causing damage. That's fundamental basic damage, the sort of damage that we see with hexes and basic curses and stuff like that. Now, I've gone and done that. I've gone and destroyed something. I've broken something. But compare that to the amount of damage someone can do when they actually understand what a computer is and how it works. So any person can deal with raising energy and directing it and programming it to do something, much like any idiot can use a baseball bat to smash something up or shoot something, or someone maybe. But realistically, the real serious stuff gets done when someone knows the ins and outs of the thing that they're trying to attack. Right. So if I was to be able to, see the damage or understand the damage that I could inflict with my baseball bat, versus if I was an expert hacker with access to that whole computer system, I could do untold amounts of damage with that. This wouldn't just be people losing all of their work and stuff like that. Think of what I could do to their financial records. Think of what I could do with taking money. Think of what I could do by putting stuff on that network. Think of the legal trouble I could get that company in. Think of all of the bad publicity, all of that sort of stuff. Think about this. The idea of using energy, raising it and attacking and destroying, or healing, because those people are just as bad, versus someone that really understands what they're doing, the system. They understand the system. Now, this Dion Fortune book is not really written for occultist magical practitioners with any real knowledge. It's kind of like a little bit like Heinrich Agrippa's book is. It's kind of like a checklist. You know, you go through and you're thinking, yeah, I understand that. Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, I understand that. I've noticed that. I've had experiences with that. Blah, 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 blah. It's like a primer. Okay. It's kind of like, I'm going to say a bunch of stuff that's going to be logical. Okay, to do with defensive magic. And do you agree with this? Have you got any experiences with it? Anything like that? That's kind of how I've read this book. That's how I've gone through it. And I've been able to tick the boxes. And I'm not saying it's a perfect book by any stretch of the imagination because of the nature of where it comes from. You know, this book's almost 100 years old. You know, it's written by what's essentially a Victorian lady in an occult lodge. You know, it's very hoity-toity, mercurial, okay? And that's fine, but this isn't a course, okay? So reading this book is not a course on defensive magic. If you was to teach a course on defensive magic, and I've tried and attempted to do that, and I've got success with that, but you only get success to a certain level. Because here's the thing that a lot of people don't want you to know or don't want to tell you. Defensive magic, offensive magic, and healing magic is all dependent on your current level of understanding, power level, if this was like a movie, you know, how much juice, that kind of stuff, and your creativity. Okay, so it's really current understanding, level of understanding and creativity. It is all about moves and counter moves. Okay, so everything can be undone. This entire universe can be undone. I mean, eventually it will. But think about obstacles. If you're going to attack someone or defend from an attack, okay, people stereotypically think I need to memorize a bunch of moves. In the real world, physical world, you have things like self-defense classes, okay, when it comes to this idea. It's the idea of, this is going to happen to me, how do I overcome it? And training to overcome it. Okay. When it comes to cyber attacks, cyber fraud, that kind of thing, is a case of, and con artists, and that is a case of, well, these people have been ripped off by clicking on this email, or these people have been ripped off by giving their bank account details, and I will protect myself by not doing that. I will set up systems in place. Now, realistically, that'll only get you so far, won't it? And within the magical community, there is this idea that energy can be transmutated. Okay, transmutation. If I hex someone, they can just block that or take the energy, absorb it, transmute it into something. That is 101 basic attack and defense. There are far more levels above that. Okay, so if you're attacking a magical practitioner, there is this idea that you shouldn't do that because they'll just be able to undo it. That's bullshit. I'm sorry, but that's not true. Okay, for the simple reason that there are levels that magical practitioner probably hasn't gotten to yet. Okay, so if we're looking at, and I've used this example quite a lot, imagine mundanes are on the ground floor of an apartment block complex. So it's a block of flats, say. Mundanes are on the ground floor, they know fuck all. People with a little bit of a background in some sort of magic, maybe they've read a few Wiccan books or, you know, new agey books and that, and they deal with some kind of psychic stuff. They can sense something, they can do basic spells and that. Okay, next level, first floor. Okay, then we've got more adept people. We've got people that have actually dedicated and got a lot of experience with magical practice. Okay, next level. If we're now on the second level, okay, and a leak tends to happen, you know, I don't know, water tank bursts, all of this water is going to start falling through the floor, going through the floor, okay? The problem is if this leak happens on the second floor, then it's going to flood the first floor, and the ground floor, which basically means that if you're attacking on that level, no one underneath that level is going to be able to fix the problem. They're going to be able to get buckets as it's coming through the ceiling, and they're going to be trying to collect all the water, do damage control, but they are not going to be able to fix the problem. This is how black magic works, okay? This is what people do not explain, okay? So Dion Fortune's Psychic Self-Defense is a book written for everyday people that have an interest in this kind of thing, okay? There are some good parts and some bad parts. The primary focus of this book, from what I can tell, is almost like, here's loads of potential problems that could happen, okay? Whether it would be you've disturbed some kind of energy or remains and there's some sort of ghosties, nasties or something like that, whether it's someone's directly trying to assault you in the physical world and stuff like that, take advantage of you, using mentalism, using psychology, the book covers that, using hexes, curses, the book kind of covers that as well. All of these ideas, psychic vampirism, all of that, it is covered in the book, but it doesn't necessarily teach you how to get over those, which is good. It is good that it doesn't try to do that in a, perfect way. What this book does is makes you aware, okay, which is what I really like about the book, is that it makes you aware that these are potential problems. These are potential attacks, ways that you could be attacked, okay, ways that you could attack other people. You could use it as a book of inspiration. I think I might try that on Jane next door, because I don't like her. She's a bitch, and she's been thinking that she's some kind of high level ceremonial magician sorceress type, and I think I'll teach her a lesson, right? It even goes into motivation. What are the motivations behind magical attacks and such? Quite interesting. The main takeaway is that you can only defend from your own perspective, your own level of understanding. So yes, just because you have been able to fix all the problems, because someone's done some stupid little jinx or hex on you, if you've done a cleansing ritual, do not under any circumstances think that you cannot be bested, because you can. Does that mean that that's very likely? Not necessarily, but the very fact that it can happen does mean that you are open to that. When it comes to defensive forms of magic, my go-to method for teaching it is offensive magic, which is, how are you going to attack this person, and what or thing, spirit, whatever it is, concept even, organizations, whatever it is, how are you going to attack it? And then when you understand how you would attack it and the multitude of ways you would attack it or could attack it, how would you defend against those attacks, right? There is no wishy-washy supreme banishing ritual that is going to fix and be the perfect way. Panacea is not really a thing. This perfect healing remedy. Take that understanding of modern medicine and stuff, we know that's a crock of shit. Take that from a defensive perspective. It is also a crock of shit. There is no super cleansing that you can do to fix any problem, no sort of super banishing or protective magic that you can do to fix anything. It is moves and counter moves like chess. One of the reasons occultists are taught chess in a lot of these kind of Western traditions anyway, and some of the Eastern ones actually. Anyway, I digress. So what we need to remember is, if we want to progress with defensive forms of magic, we need to be applying our current level of understanding and drawing on that for inspiration to think of clever ways to defend ourselves. And what we always need to be aware is there's always a bigger fish, so you are not indestructible, and it can always be done. When you reach a block, if you were trying to get into someone's head or destroy someone's life or attack a magical practitioner of great renown or something, it can be done. There are ways around everything. Okay. Now, one of the things that I am actually quite worried about is not the fact that Chris has obviously just turned up, because that in itself could be potentially quite worrying. Mr. Chris, you're there, aren't you? You're here.
Enter the bigger fish.
Enters a bigger fish, he says. one of the things that, Chris, I think this book highlights is that this book is almost 100 years old. It came out in 1930, I think it was. And yet look at how far the common person's knowledge of defensive magic has gone. It's not gone, it's gone backwards. Look at the beginner levels of magical practitioners, people just starting out on their path or have been practicing for a certain amount of time. Maybe they've been doing it for 10 years and have got some experience, you know. Their level of practice is often so poor. And when you look at all of the publications, all of the information that's coming out, and I compare it to this book that's almost 100 years old, we're not improving. Our teaching for defensive magic, psychic assaults, all of that is going backwards. And I find that very stupid and foolish. And, you know, this is interesting in the form of a little time capsule, because this is a very kind of Victorian-y approach, very logical, very to the point, you know, clear, concise. I like that to a certain extent, although it can be a little bit much. But we're not seeing that from the books, from the knowledge that's being put out there now. Nowadays, it's too much of a case, and I don't want to bring this book up too much. It's too much of a case of, oh, something bad's happening to you. Do this spell. Do this cleansing ritual. This ain't like the Skeleton Key, you know the film? This ain't like the Skeleton Key where you do a ritual and stuff like that to fix things, okay? What we're actually seeing now, okay, I think, I don't know if you'd agree, you're from a medical background, is people that we in the occult community seem to look up to. But back in the day, several, you know, we're talking possibly hundreds of years ago, definitely thousands of years ago, these people were like doctors. The people, the elders in the occult magical community were kind of like renowned. They really studied. They had so much experience, that kind of thing. Nowadays, what I'm seeing is a lot of these, so say, elders, experienced magical practitioners that are writing books and stuff like that. They're the equivalent of the people that are used to popping headache tablets and using over-the-counter medications and calling themselves and thinking they're a doctor because I've got a rash and I go and get some special cream from a Tesco's or Asda or Walmart and I put on the rash and I know it fixed it. You know, this is like the level of understanding that I am a little bit worried about, is that there used to be not a hierarchy, but there used to be less, I think, of the people at the bottom, beginners. You had a fair amount of people with a lot of knowledge, expertise that were really delving in, pushing, and then you had people that knew fuck all. This little group in the middle was very small. And yet now, this group in the middle is huge. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, largely it's because we live in the world of the tinterweb.
I suppose.
And social media, which means that over the last kind of 20 years or so, it's got worse and worse and worse, in the sense that people have access to more information than they've ever had. So, you know, back in the day we're referring to, you only had books if you could afford to buy them.
Yeah.
Which meant, you know, this is why, unfortunately, most of the occult writings that people like to, you know, wet themselves over are written by posh boys that were obviously taught Latin at school and dead languages, were able to go to places like Eton, and then were able to actually afford to not have to work and could sit at home as true armchair magicians and write shit after shit after shit book, because they're still based on what their understanding was. Now with Dion, obviously, she was heavily influenced by the likes of psychoanalysis and the arrival of Freud. And then obviously she was also surrounded by the people of the Theosophical Society, those sorts of people. that, you know, equally she's thinking that nothing on the other side wants to hurt you unless you've somehow hurt it, which we both know is not the true case of things. But I don't know.
Dion Fortune was a proper occultist. She was in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. She studied occultism. Nowadays, people don't study occultism. They don't study magic. Okay, it's all about a quick wham bam thank you ma'am. It's not no study of the theory and practice of magic. Dion Fortune was very big on that. I'll quote her. Two of my favorite quotes from Dion Fortune from this book. The great majority of dabblers in occultism are protected by their own ineptitude. She goes on to talk about most people can't even make magic happen, which is why we don't see so many massive problems with regards to that. Also, with regards to spell work, protection spells, that kind of thing, most formula are incomplete. There is always unwritten work. She does talk quite a lot about this idea that you can't open a magical spell book and expect it to work because you don't have a clue what you're talking about. You don't understand what's going on. In this book, there's quite a lot of good quotes. A ritual lodge is no place for the well-meaning ineffectual, so the incompetent. Here's the difference in that quote, is the difference between where occultism was at in the 1900s and before to when it started to change, I believe, in the 1950s. I won't say why it started to change in the 1950s, but this idea of you actually, even some of the early Wiccans, they also talk about this. I know Maxine Sanders spoke about this at length in a book that I read once about we would only let in and teach the people that were actually ever going to be any good. Nowadays, it's this throwing out of anyone can be a witch, anyone can be a magical practitioner. And you can go down a magical path. But what you need to understand is if you really want to be any good, you need to understand how magic works. This idea of cunning folk, I just slap this bit of juice from the aloe vera plant on and it cures the burn, is things where you're copy and paste, you're taking little snippets, okay, and you're saying, aloe vera, if there's a burn or anything like that, put it on the skin. Everyone, I am a magical practitioner of some renowned in the village. I heal and cure burns with my magical plants, you know. This is not the level we're talking about when it comes to trying to push down the kind of, I think, witchcraft, magician, magical practitioner, occultist route is serious, is about you want to really, really, really understand the nature of things and how they work. And unfortunately, that person that relies on copying and memorizing little bits of lore, the aloe vera plant, they think all I need to start doing is memorizing what all of these other plants do, and then I'll be a witch, then I'll be a healer. And no, because what you need to be able to do is understand how all of this stuff works so that you can make new discoveries. This is all about building on, standing on the shoulders of those that have come before, is a lot of what magical practice is about. This book does put that, you know, it does very much push that idea. There is one or two things that she does say that is a little iffy that I don't necessarily agree with. But in terms of like those medical books where it's like a flow chart and it asks you for your symptoms and then gives you an answer, I think people are using this book as one of those, and that really isn't the case. I don't think that it has any merit for one of those books. Instead, the type of author Dion Fortune seems to be is, I'm going to tell you a little story of something that happened, and then I'm going to understand and tell you the principles of why that happened. You know, there's this little story about thought forms. There's this little story about someone blackmailing someone. There's this little story about this, little story about that. They take a story, because humans are good with stories. And they break apart why this is happening. The diagnosis. She's quite heavy on the diagnosis. The practical, how to defend against that. This book is somewhat lacking, and is lacking because I think she's trying to push across the point of you don't need to be told, like in some sort of flow chart, this is happening, prescribe this. This is happening, lie in a bath of salt and say a prayer. That isn't proper defensive magic. And Dion Fortune is a very serious person. Occultists, me and Chris, very serious people. We like to have a laugh, but very serious when it comes to our magic and teaching magic. We want to teach people to progress. We don't want to run first aid courses. Would that be a good way of putting it?
Yeah, I think so.
But there we go. First aid is what we're getting. Magical equivalent of first aid. Silly little tidbits of, okay, I understand if something really serious happens, I might be able to stop it going any further whilst I run and call 999 or 911 if you're American. You know, it's like a little stopgap. I realize, and this book kind of pushes that, is not so much about defense and teaching people how to defend themselves. It's actually about teaching them how to identify a problem and then where you might go in order to get someone to fix that problem. Okay, that is what first aid is all about. It's all about stopping the person from dying or doing your best until the actual people that are going to fix the problem show up. Okay, when we teach magical practice, witchcraft and that, we are training the people that show up to fix the problem. What we do not do, which is what lots of people seem to do nowadays, is train first aiders. Okay, we don't do this spell a day type nonsense. We don't do this, oh, it's fine, do this cleansing ritual. And there's been a number of people over this year that have come to me that should know better with regards to, I've got myself in this situation, I tried to do some form of cleansing or block, and it didn't fix the problem came back. So then I did the cleansing again, I did the block again, and then the problem came back. And they're not understanding what the problem is, because they've too bogged down in this idea of books like this, chapters, like this has a chapter on protection, i.e. I don't want someone to attack me and no one's attacking me at the moment. Shield, I'm going to build some shield. It hasn't happened yet, but I want to make sure it doesn't happen, so protection type magic. Or counter magic, which is someone's hexed me, someone's cursed me, someone's done something naughty, nasty. I'm going to reverse that or cleanse that or stop that type of magic. Or other forms of magic, which are a little bit kind of, you know, more like compass type magic, keeping yourself away from stupid situations, which is basically the only form of protection the New Age understand. The New Age understands that if I only hang around with these types of spirits, only deal with this energy, raise my vibration up, no one else is going to, baddies are going to be able to reach me. But realistically, that is so not the case. Okay. It is. I could go off on a rant, so you might need to save the day here. Otherwise, I'm going to be upsetting some New Agers.
I think what I find interesting is how, like you said, you use the word, I think, manual in the post for this. And I think that's part of the problem, is people look at the books like this, which, you know, like you've said before, it would be better to look at it as a bit of an encyclopedia of different types of practice or different types of problems. But actually, it's not a manual as how to deal with them.
Yes.
You know, this isn't it doesn't give a methodology of how to do these things. What it's doing is identifying that these things are possible, which is how a lot of these books are written, and it's a testament to the time, unfortunately. which is the Witchcraft Act is still in place. Occultism was a bit of this grey area where you could talk about the process, but you couldn't really teach people how, which is why she's often referred to as a novelist, isn't she? Because she wrote storybooks.
Yeah.
She was another one of these that was very good at putting magical words. Obviously, you know, the Wiccan Messiah obviously borrowed this style 50 years later.
Oh, Scott.
And Scott Cunningham borrowed this kind of style of writing a lot later on. But essentially, that was the loophole. They could talk about magical practice as long as we were talking about Christianity, or we were talking about, so as long as you were to use angels and demons and talk about them as kind of fantasy creatures, you could get away with writing about them and publishing about them. Otherwise, you know, the Church of England would have stopped them and had the power to. So, you know, it was you've got to take these books in their actual historical context and say, well, what isn't she saying? What can't she say? So there is a lot of reading between the lines, taking things with a pinch of salt when you use texts that are pre-1950s. So do not use it as a manual. So
I'm going to say something very controversial, and I'm going to play on a quote. I know it's most unlike me, right? But I'm going to use this book and Dion Fortune's own words to make a point. So she says, you'll like this one, Chris, I think. A superstition has been defined as the blind use of a form whose significance has been forgotten. We have not a lot of magical practitioners in the world today, unfortunately. The ones on YouTube, on social media, and that are writing all of these books, pretty much everyone that publishes or writes for Llewellyn, basically is superstitious, not a magical practitioner. There is a difference. A magical practitioner understands why they are doing the thing that they do, and they will be able to find a different way of doing it. The superstitious say, I've been told to do that. I've been told to say that. The book says to do that. I've been showed to do this. But they have no understanding of how it works. And most of the time it doesn't. Okay. The person that gets an over-the-counter cream and thinks, wait a minute, it did wonders for my eczema, but it isn't helping with my headache. What up with that? It is a copy and paste and not an understanding. Now, the controversial is that in magical practice, certainly in the 25th, we're not in the 25th century yet, are we?
Don't be giving spoilers, Liam.
20th century and 21st century, late 20th century and early 21st century, here we go, is about belonging to communities. It is about the latest craze. And what was a latest craze was this whole Wicca thing, okay? And then what happened was the Wiccans and a lot of these people that cling to those kind of ideas of copy and paste, they completely massacred and destroyed the religion of Wicca by turning it into this. A bunch of spells and mumbo-jumbo without any idea or concept of how they work, or trying to push sacred magic, their understanding. These people thought, they haven't thought this, but this is what I think. Oh, this whole Wicca thing's uncool now. You know, no one's cool does this Wicca stuff anymore. Let's jump on traditional witchcraft, the traditional witchcraft bandwagon, and that way we can make fun of everyone. Because you see, now I'm a traditional witch, or I should say a modern traditional witch.
PKTW.
What I'm doing is I can take these spells and I can take the mick out of everyone who's using these spells. But then what I can do is exactly the same thing, this superstition, misunderstanding and not having a clue about what's going on, because I'm going back to original sources. I'm using mythology. Now, I've met a number of basically people that call themselves traditional witches. Some people even have YouTube channels and such. I've met people that have written books, both Wiccan-y style, New Agey style, you know, traditional witchcraft style. And when you say, how does that work? They don't know. They can't understand. They will say sources, abracadabra. It means this. It means that. This is how it does. It's all to do with either intention or representational magic or this, that, and the other. And you're like, no, no, no. If this was to happen to you, or if you were to go about doing this, how would you do it? Well, I've got this spell for that. Have you? Okay, you've got this spell for that. Okay, now I want you to do this. Oh, I haven't got a spell for that. But I suppose I could maybe tweak it this, that, and the other. Why are you tweaking it like that? Well, I don't know. I'm not understanding the principles of the very basics of how it works. And that is a travesty.
Ultimately, I think a lot of it comes back from what I was saying before, and I'll push it a step further, which is they have looked at the original sources but not considered their context. So if you
they don't understand the original sources, because most of their idea of an original source would be something like Heinrich Agrippa. Is that an original source? I don't fucking think it is.
But to them it is. It's in a book.
Yes, it's in an old book.
They've got
a book that's out of, you know, basically copyrights ended, therefore it must be an original source, you know.
Yeah.
But it's not good enough. It is not good enough for you to get Greek magical papyri and copy a spell out of that. And this is the problem that I'm seeing also with the new lot is, but the spell I'm copy and paste is an ancient spell, not one made up in the 20th century. You're still copying and pasting it. You're still not understanding how it works. But it's original, it's ancient, it's an ancient. The ancients believed that, and because they believed it and it's been used so many times, it's got some power. That's bullshit. That is weak magic. Possibly some of the most weakest magic I've ever seen is this concept of it's been used so many times before. Do you know what that is? That is literally like the time I was asked to help move a shed. We had to pick up a shed and move it so that it faced a different way. And there was 10 people there. There was 10 guys there. And this illustrates the concept perfectly. The ones that couldn't really be bothered made it look like they were lifting it up, but didn't put much back into it and didn't put much effort into it. What you're saying is there's been so much energy that's been pumped into this sigil, concept, thing, word, whatever, that you're so weak that you're basically borrowing the leftover energy. What about that screams adept, strong, self-empowered magical practitioner? Because to me it done. I don't know about you, Chris. Maybe I'm wrong. This is one of the most weakest forms of magic. I hate this concept of this representational magic and sympathetic magic and retaining energy because I'm just copying it. That's copy and paste magic still. Okay? Yes, I represent something. I draw a cave painting because I want this to happen. There is still a reason as to how it works. Just memorizing representational magic, just taking a candle and smearing a load of correspondences on it is just as bad as saying, well, I like gorse because it's always been around me and it makes me feel better, and that's my own personal correspondence, so I'm putting it in symbolically. It represents something to me. That is still weak magic. You are not activating it. You're not pulling on the energy of it. You are putting in symbolic representations of something. That is weak magic. You can take those things that are representative and you can work with them magically. Okay? But just putting them in the spell or rich or whatever. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't add anything other than psychologically. And again, because of this thing being pushed, they think it's just psychology. But adding an ingredient to a spell, well, it's just psychology. It just makes me feel like the spell. I feel involved with it. I like it. It all just explains it, you know? No, there are reasons for adding something, you know? And if you want to go by the psychology thing, don't burn a bloody candle in the first place. Just do it by your own mind. What is the point if you're not using the energy within the ingredients and you're just doing it by your own energy? What's the point of getting these ingredients in the first place? Just do it in the astral. Oh, these people can't get to the astral, I forgot.
I was not expecting this to be a PKTW rant.
Well, you know, one final one then. One final quote. Okay, see what you feel about this. The finest minds in occultism are totally unknown outside their own orders. She's talking magical orders. The people on the YouTube, the people writing the books, all of these people are the idiots. This is basically what she's saying. Because the people that are powerful enough and strong enough and knowledgeable enough to do big things, guess what? They're going and doing those big things. What they're not necessarily doing is putting out content for people that have no idea about magic and pretend they have an interest in it. That's the idea. If you are in a magical lodge, you will have passed some sort of an initiation for it. Okay, you will have shown that you're actually, whether you're any good or not, besides the point, but you will have shown that you're actually serious. Okay, you wouldn't have just spent $9.99 buying a spell book from Amazon. You will have actually had to get off your ass and do something. Therefore, the adept people that you are meeting that are in this organization, you're probably going to be bumping into them. Okay, because of the work, the nature of that organization, the nature of that coven, you know, the nature of the magical practice that goes on is not going to be people that are spending all of their time going out and trying to teach people that don't want to be taught. Because just because you have an interest in magic, occultism, and witchcraft does not mean you want to be taught. Just because you say you are interested and want to be taught does not mean you want to be taught. I've seen this time and time again, Chris, where people say, I want to learn witchcraft and magic. I give them something simple to do, and they don't fucking do it. I'm going to rant, but you better say stuff.
Proper ranting. Yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky because we're sat here on YouTube making those comments.
We've not put any serious magical practice out there. We have never released a video, a podcast, or anything like that has put a high level magic out there, which should give you some fucking indication, if you think all of the stuff we've talked about is high level magic, of where you are.
Oi, Ranty McRanterson, calm down. My point was, she sat there writing a book that she's publishing and publishes multiple books after that, making that exact statement, that those that are seriously practicing are not writing books. So my point is, you're mirroring what she's doing, which is saying something that doesn't match what her actions say. Anyway, the point I was leading on to make was, obviously, you know, we've kind of taken a step away from our big workings because we're not here for that this lifetime, and therefore have said, oh, we can donate some spare time to kind of trying to push the level up a little bit by putting some better content out there. But like you just ranted about, obviously we're not putting out anything out there that is super high occulty. What's scary is people watch our content because they think it's high and mighty and powerful. And the problem is, actually, most of what we talk about is basic ass shit because you aren't prepared for taking the stuff beyond that level. And that's not a criticism, although it kind of is. It's a backhanded compliment that just kind of says this is where occultism is at currently. You know, it's a good opportunity, talking about Dion, to actually talk about this concept of what is out there, what is available, what is its context. Are you understanding it in the way it was written, bearing in mind she left lots of shit out on purpose because of the time, and actually remembering that every time you go to a book, you should be looking for what's not said. You should be looking for, actually, is there anything beyond the veneer? The problem you will then find is a lot of books written since the 50s don't have anything written between the lines, which is what's so worrying for us as practitioners, and for serious practitioners out there will struggle to go, well, actually, this book is as shallow as it appears. The tricky part is like we've talked about before, if you've watched our other content, it is really hard to write an advanced magical book, or even an intermediary one, because you've got to say, well, actually, they need to understand everything before they get there. So it's like writing a book that teaches French, but actually not including any of the breakdown of how verbs work, because that's essentially where you need to start.
Yeah.
You're starting halfway through with advanced words in archaic French, is what we're basically saying. Is when you get to that intermediate stage, not even the advanced ones, the start of the intermediary stage, if you write a book like that, it is like a book written about let's learn French, and actually doesn't include any modern phrases like, you know, here is the library, because at that point those phrases are expected that you understand. This is like you trying to read something by a French philosopher, you know, because that's at the level you should be that at when you get an intermediary book. So a lot of these, even the ones that are described as manuals, will expect you to have some level of knowledge that you're entering it with. And the reason being is, like Liam said, the people writing these books were scholars. They're not Aunt Jemima in the hut down the road giving out salve recipes. These are people that have devoted probably 10, 20 years of their life to reading everything that was available in somewhere like the Bodleian in Oxford. All these magical texts that were available, or if they were in some secret order, obviously whatever their version of those books were, the ones probably handwritten, and aren't. So, you know, you won't find those texts anywhere. They don't exist unless you're part of these orders, or you happen to have some great-great-grandfather that's hidden a stash of boxes somewhere. But bearing in mind the good old traditions where we used to burn all our books with us, on the funeral pyre, or buried with us to make sure that they degraded like we did, it is tricky to find those levels of grimoires available, because they're not there.
How much of this big problem? Because obviously there's a lack of role models, I think, within the magical and occultist community, of people that they can actually see and interact with. The lack of cool, good role models, and apprenticeships is basically mirroring a role model. You're hanging around with someone that knows a trade or knows a skill, and that you rubs off on you, you pick up, they teach you, blah blah blah. Witchcraft magic has always been that kind of an approach, that it is mentored. But the idea of, if we were to write a book, or if someone was to write a book, or it's just the very fact of how people read a book, because books nowadays are read to be copy and pasted. I think Dion Fortune's book was read to inspire, make you think. It's not about, oh, I'm being haunted by a ghost, go and do this. It's about, what would you do if you were haunted by a ghost? This person did this, that person did that. Why are you haunted by a ghost? You know, all of that is making you think. You're supposed to work it out. It isn't about memorizing. Maybe it's the schooling system. Maybe it's because we memorize and regurgitate, memorize and regurgitate. Maybe that is a big
test.
Yeah. It's actually about creativity, you trying to work out the why and the how, not being told this is how this works, this is how that works. Memorize it, regurgitate it. You know, magic often isn't taught like that. And when it is, it's only taught for you to be able to notice patterns. We talk about the little spell triangle, right? But that is not designed for you to memorize and regurgitate. That is designed for you to start to notice a pattern in your own practice and in other people's magic. Oh, wait a minute. My spells always seem to go wrong because they kind of start working and then all of a sudden they kind of cut flat. It's like, oh, okay. Energy, it gets you to start thinking. It's not about copy and pasting and having a perfect theory of how it works. It's about being able to inspire you to start to see connections in things, which is super important.
Well, it's like how the way you put earlier with Dion, it's about, it is a manual that is designed for you to diagnose. It's for you to actually know, oh, that's what that problem looks like.
Yes.
Okay, now I know what I'm targeting. Like, do you know? And then the rest of it you've got to come up with. But all it's going to tell you is, oh, okay, well, those are all the signs of a poltergeist. Maybe I need to look at my cleansing rituals. Do you know what I mean? Like, it should be that kind of concept, but it's not used that way because we're not used to, in this day and age, unfortunately, going to a book to then have to think.
That's
you
true.
go to a book for an answer.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. And they don't provide an answer, and they were never designed to provide an answer. They were designed to kind of help you get down a process, help you, like you say, inspire you to take the next steps down that process.
Yeah.
And these books don't provide that. But again, a lot of that is because it's hard to do. It's hard to write a definitive guide to anything. Because by the time you finish writing it, it's already out of date. Because any progressive movement should be pushing forward. I think my biggest problem with the ancient sources crew and the recreationalists is that there is a suggestion that because it is old, therefore it is better. And that is what I struggle with, because those ancients would have been at the cutting edge of their practice, which means if you'd have gone back and seen that same scroll 20 years later, or even 5 years later, it would have been written completely differently. Also, they seem to forget that when they look at them, they're not actually dealing with their context. They're looking at the reception of our understanding of their context. And they don't seem to think that, oh, well, but just because all the archaeologists agree that spoon was for some sacred libation treatment to deal with the common cold, is because they've come to that educated guess of that's what it's for. Or they think they've understood how that is. Bearing in mind, anything to do with language, which is why I get so tricky about books, anything to do with language is subjective. So, that's our understanding of that verb, which means that you've gone, oh, okay, well, the modern Egyptians use this word. It sounds very similar to that word. Therefore, it must have a similar archetype. And you just kind of like, actually, you can speak to people, this generation of kids using the word fag completely different to the way we used the fag 20 years ago. And how we used it 20 years ago is completely different to our parents using it 20 years before that. So, you know, the same word is there, but meaning changes all the time. So unless you're going to tap in to that energetically and actually read directly from the wall and take that psychic impression. So I'm desperately trying to bring it back to psychic. You know, if you're not going to take that kind of psychic way of approaching all the things you read and do, so that you can pick up on the layers beyond the layers beyond the layers, then you're not learning anything at all, regardless of however many books you read by however many fantastic people. Doesn't make you any more fantastic because you can regurgitate that person's words, even if you understand them. Because actually, until you're putting them into practice and finding a way to change them, you're not pushing anything anywhere. And actually, that still means you're a student. And I thought the idea was for you to all become masters.
Does one ever stop being a student?
No, if you want to keep learning, but you change the master that you are learning from. You know, it starts with the person that used to teach you. Then you go and learn from, say, a particular metal or a particular plant, and you learn another layer and another layer. Each time you're picking up a new layer and a new layer, but you're taking a new teacher every time.
Yeah, in traditional occultism, the student should always surpass the master. At some very crucial points in history, that hasn't happened, and when that hasn't happened, you've got less qualified people running the shop, and it becomes a shit show. And then sometimes you get the reception year one kids, the only ones left, and that is just kind of like everything's been washed away at that point. But there we go. We've only got a couple more of these not a book review episodes until this. Not that. Sorry. We've only got a couple of not book reviews. Not book reviews. What is this called? It's not a book review. This is a series of non-book reviews. But after this series of non-book reviews finishes, we do see the return of everyone's favorite show.